Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of the Niche Cast. We are here for a big old Aotearoa sporting kōrero. We're not too much Aotearoa sports. We're just going to really zone in on city kickboxing season. We've got a bunch of city kickboxing UFC fights, and we have a couple of UFC city kickboxing boxing fights as well. So lots of city kickboxing to digest, and then it is the second Niche Cage Derby of the NRL season. Warriors versus Dragons, two mediocre teams finally representing the Niche Cage. And that goes down on Saturday evening. So we'll use that as an entry to a big old rugby league discussion. These are quite timely matters. So we're just going to focus on those things for today's episode. On Monday, we recorded a nice Patreon podcast, and big it up to all the Patreon whānau supporting the Niche Cage. That is a fantastic way to support our mahi in broadcasting Aotearoa sporting excellence. And every week there's an extra cricketing podcast where we have basically outlined Aotearoa's demolition of England coming up. But it's about to get a whole lot more funkier because they're about to start playing cricket. So while we will cover, obviously, that's what we do, cover the Black Caps all over the Niche Cage, every week there's going to be an extra podcast about cricket, and that is going to revolve around the Black Caps tour of England as well. So A, Patreon's the best way to support us straight up the guts, and B is an extra cricketing podcast every week. But you don't it's not about the money. If you're listening to this, big it up to yourself. If you're reading our shit, big it up to you as well. Kia kaha. And also shout out to everyone who's just providing their generosity with their time and their efforts in learning about Aotearoa sport just as we are. So big up to the Patreon whānau. Also, if you're not part of the Patreon whānau and you're listening to this, shout out to you as well. We like you. Friday's tomorrow, so that means we've got an email newsletter coming out tomorrow as well. Every Monday and Friday evening, we serve up some extra relevant, current eventy type of Aotearoa sporting content. So stay tuned for that. Sign up as via Substack, so the nichecage.substack.com. All of these links are in the description boxes. And if you're a bit off social media, Māori order to yourself, because all the Niche Cage content goes straight into that email. So you can get off social media and just check your emails every Monday and Friday, and it's all there for you. Podcasts, links, and extra words about Aotearoa sport. And of course, we're always writing about Aotearoa sport in depth, theniche-cage.com. We've got a reflection on the Wellington Phoenix season. We've got a big old Aotearoa Warriors diary previewing their game against the Dragons. I wrote about Kane Williamson. I've written about Hayes Perham and Matthew Tomoko in the NRL. Wildcard's got a big old Stephen Adams yarn coming up as well. All Whites yarns, Flying Kiwis yarns, Shea Illy yarns in the NBL Australian version. So I don't know, you can probably check in on that on the daily and find a new sporting yarn to enjoy. This is a podcast, though. And we start our podcast with a dose of mindfulness. Wildcard. Hit him up.
Yeah, hit him up with some Native American proverbery. This one goes: any persons whom you have ever met, even if you have just it's a Native American proverb, and it starts talking about a bus. That threw me for a second. I don't know how. I think it might have been updated for the times. Anyway, any persons whom you have ever met, even if you have just exchanged a glance on a bus, have become part of your being, and consequently you are, in some sense, responsible for them. You carry them in your heart.
That can get quite heavy if you're carrying someone else's energy
Certainly.
with you for a while. That gets quite intense. So what's the best thing to do? Just stay light and airy. A lot of good vibes, a lot of gratitude and love for the other person and anyone else on this planet, because we're all just trying to be happy. So I can see how that one can go wrong. Like if you're carrying their energy, that gets a bit iffy on your energy, but there's an easy fix there. And this is where the mindfulness comes in, because we take that mindfulness, we find the easiest route possible, and that is just to love everyone, have a bit of gratitude, and enjoy our time on this planet. That's something I've been developing and working on, is just as long as everyone's happy, it's all good. Like, I don't really care. Like, if you're happy, that's what we're here for. I'm trying to be happy. I want you to be happy. I don't really care how, but it's all about happiness, love, and light. So big up to all the native people around the world, because we're just a couple of colonizers. You know, we don't really know what's up.
I mean, the colonizers were native somewhere once upon a time. They just extended their bounds a little bit too much, arguably. That one, I think that quote kind of plays in quite well with the one that I had on Monday as well, about how most of the sorrow that people feel and the pain and stuff is actually sort of imported from other people, and it's sort of it's from the same app that I got it from. Where was it? Most of the hurts we experience are not meant for us. They're byproducts of the suffering of others that others are feeling. The truth is that most of the pain and suffering we feel isn't directed at us at all. That is where it gets heavy, is where you cross those and where you're just like carrying other people's hurt and pain and stuff. Whereas if you carry other people's joy, it's the same thing, but it's a lot healthier for everyone. And then also I think it's a lot easier to bear that kind of weight of responsibility of that interconnectedness, which is sort of what that thing is going at. If you follow like the old Ram Dass ideas of like, we're all just like an extension of God, and then from one, what's the word? One, not unique, but common starting point, you know, like everyone's connected, everyone's kind of the same. Everyone is a reflection of the same life force. In that case, suddenly it's not like you're carrying, like once you start looking at it through that lens, you're not carrying the weight of like 6-7 billion people or whatever. You're carrying the weight of one, which is like the human race kind of thing, you know? And not human race, actually, that's a limitation as well. Just like life itself, include chuck the animals, chuck the plants in, chuck the planet in there, you know, chuck the stars in the sky and all that, chuck it all in there, mix it all together. That's what you got.
Some of us run it straight, some of us spin it wide, some of us are making tackles, some of us playmaking, distributing. Everyone plays their role. Everything plays their role on the beautiful planet Earth. Let's get stuck into some city kickboxing notes here, because this the combat sports really comes in waves, I reckon. Like, there's not too many like city kickboxing UFC fights where it's just a one-off, as far as like the bro is fighting on a, like, usually it's just Dan Hooker. Like, that's the only example I can think of. Dan Hooker's fighting anyone, anywhere, and it doesn't really tie in with the general city kickboxing stuff. But what city kickboxing does do well is get a couple of dudes on the same card, or generally fighting around the same time, which just makes all their logistical stuff a lot easier. And speaking of logistical stuff, it seems like it's over. The logistical nightmares that all of Aotearoa sport and the world sport, whatever, but especially city kickboxing, where these dudes were fighting at the highest level with niggly preparation and like mix and match coaching. Sure, Eugene Behrman or Doug Viney is pulling the strings behind the scenes. They're doing a lot of video. They're, you know, staying on top of all their fighters, but it's like, who can we get to corner the bro? You know, who can we get? Who's there? Who's here? Who's going over there? Who's going to be in this one, that one? And it just becomes like a random group of city kickboxing coaches in the corner for the fighters, as opposed to the general status quo where everything's streamlined, everything's by design. Eugene Behrman, Twist, Tristram Apakatoa, I think, and those type of dudes, Andre Paulette, Mike Angrove isn't involved, I don't think so much anymore, but those type of dudes are all in the corner together. They're breaking down everything. So, you know, let alone just the training stuff that those dudes had to endure in Aotearoa. And that is to say, it's city kickboxing season coming into the winter months. And shout out Combat TV, probably the best like media to get you just straight into city kickboxing. The guy Tony, I think is his name. He's always got fresh interviews with all city kickboxing people, the boxing people, and the MMA people as well at city kickboxing. And one of the recent interviews had Eugene Behrman celebrating the buzz at city kickboxing. like even Gina Fabian, she fights in the PFL and she has come back to Aotearoa. She was stuck in the USA for like almost a year, and now she's back at City Kickboxing in Auckland. Everyone's back on site training for world-class fighting. And as Eugene Behrman said in that Combat TV interview, it generates a bit of a buzz, which is good to see. So as far as, we'll just list off these fights wildcard before we get into the nitty gritty. To the best of my knowledge, we got Blood Diamond, Mike Matheta. He's fighting on June 11th. Carlos Ulberg is fighting on June 25th. Then we've got Brad Riddell and Israel Adesanya on the July 2nd card. Obviously, Adesanya headlining that event. And there's also Alexander Volkanovski, City Kickboxing associate. He is fighting before Adesanya on that July 2nd card. And then Kai Kara France has a title fight, interim title fight on July 30th. So that is a month and a bit, month and a half. And we've got 5 City Kickboxing MMA fights. Hopefully there will be a PFL fight for Gina Fabian. And I don't know what Shane Young is up to. So what's the boxing menu for City Kickboxing looking like, wildcard?
Yeah, City Kickboxing got 2 like relatively major contenders. Is too soon to say that, but 2 big solid like heavyweight prospects at the moment, Hemi Ahiro and of course Junior Fa. Both of them are fighting on this card, and it's been a long time between drinks because like last we heard from Hemi Ahiro, he was over in the Middle East, had a good win there and a little tournament-y thing there. That was, I don't know, like, can't remember exactly when, at least 6 months ago, probably more like closer to a year ago, but I'd have to check that. Junior Fa, meanwhile, has not fought since last, was it January or February? When was it? The last time he fought was against Joseph Parker. So Joseph Parker since then has gone on and he has fought, not only has he fought Derek Chisora once, but he's fought Derek Chisora twice. And now he's preparing for what'll most likely, it sounds like, probably going to fight English heavyweight Joe Joyce in his next bout. Curious times with Joe Parker because his matchroom deal with Eddie Hearn's, as promoter is actually expired now and hasn't been picked up. Hearn, I don't think, offered another contract, and Parker, I don't think, wanted another contract. I don't know which one came first, the chicken or the egg there. I don't know if Hearn didn't offer one because Parker wasn't going to sign it or vice versa. But they're hoping to fight just like as independents for a wee while, and in the hope that it'll be maybe they'll have a little bit more control over where they end up and who they end up fighting and just be a little bit freer to negotiate with some of these other dudes like Joyce, for example, who's represented by Frank Warren. This doesn't change like Andy Lee as trainer or anything like that because, Andy Lee was in the Tyson Fury camp and Fury's not part of Matchroom or anything like that. So it's Joe Parker off to the side there. He's no CKB guy though. As for Junior Fa, so yeah, he hasn't fought for, it'd be about 15, 16 months or something by the time this next one comes up. And there's been like traction about he was going to fight old what's his name, dude who beat Paul Gallen not so long ago. Instead, he's going to fight a guy who lost to Paul Gallen, which is Lucas Brown. Aussie heavyweight was, got a 30-3 record. He's been a pretty good pro in his time. His time is no longer now. Like his time's been and gone. He's 30-3, but he, most recently lost to Paul Gallen. He's 44 years old. He's had some dramas out of the ring as well, I believe. He's just sort of like the twilight years, whereas Junior Fa's on the come up at 19-1. His only loss was a pretty commendable defeat on points against Joseph Parker. So, I think that's the second main fight on this card that's coming up. Junior Fa has been represented by Lou DiBella. Lou DiBella is also promoting this George Kambosos Jr. and Devin Haney title fight, which is for the undisputed lightweight title. So Kambosos is a Australian fella, 20-0. Devin Haney is American, 27-0. That's going to be in Melbourne on June the 4th is when that one is. And not only is Junior Fa on that card, But scroll a little bit further down the page and you'll find Hemia Hill against American Joe Jones. 8 3-minute rounds there, and nice little heavyweight clash for him to get hopefully a bit of vision on the on the undercard of a pretty big fight there. That's like I would be confident that Junior Farr will beat Lucas Brown. I will be extremely confident that Hemia Hill will win that one pretty comfortably. And then you actually scroll down a little bit further as well, and like twice as nice, but triples is best. And David Nika is also on this card. He's wasn't named who he was going to fight initially. It's now since been confirmed that he's going to fight an Aussie fella, Karim Matala, who is 2-1. Only 5 rounds there. That'll be cruiserweight rather than heavyweight. David Nika will be his 3rd professional bout, and the last one he fights before he goes to the Commonwealth Games, which he's allowed to do as a pro as long as he hasn't had 5 pro fights. So no chance of that happening before then. David Nika will be up against Karim Matala, and I expect that'll probably go a similar direction to his first 2 professional fights, which will be very, very, very convincing wins. So we probably get, I think all 3 of those guys will be favorites on this card, and it's going to be a hell of a card when you've got 3 Kiwis on it. The last time all 3 of these guys, this isn't like David Nika's only had 2 fights, obviously both on Joseph Parker cards, but one of those Joseph Parker cards was Parker versus Farr, and Hemia Hill was also on that card. So this is actually the second time all 3 of these guys have fought on the same card, which is very cool. This time in Melbourne, there'll be a big crowd. There'll be like 30, 40,000 people there. And that should be, a huge event and a great experience for those dudes, all of whom should probably have, I mean, the convincing levels of wins will get less as you go up, because Brown's a solid pro. He'll hang around. Whereas I expect Nika will probably get his fight done pretty quickly. Hemia Hill is somewhere in the middle. But should, all things considered, I would be very hopeful of 3 wins out of 3 there. What's the win percentage on the MMA dudes, by the way? Like, because it's definitely not the same level of matchups that we're talking about, where like Nika, for example, is really just a like continuing to, it's like, glorified sparring session as he builds himself up. But would you expect similar levels of success on some of these fights coming up? I mean, Adesanya is always pretty good for a title defense.
Yeah, we'll crack into that, but just to lay it out as clearly as we can. So June 4th is the boxing event. So that starts off the whole party, which is fantastic. So it's 2 months. Starts on June 4th. Then we've got June 11th, June 25th, July 2nd, and July 30th, which is absolutely fantastic. And hopefully a couple more fights. So Israel Adesanya and Kai Kara-France have title fights. Adesanya, he defeated Robert Whittaker in the rematch. Now he's coming up against Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier is a very funky fighter, a lot of power, striker. And if Robert Whittaker isn't the best matchup to defeat Adesanya at this weight division, might be Jared Cannonier, because he's a very powerful young lad. Kai Kara-France has got an interim title fight. So he's already fought Brandon Moreno and he lost, but then he had a couple wins to get back into title contention. And I assume whoever wins that interim fight will then get the title fight with I think it's Davison Figueiredo, who has had a couple of fights against Moreno already. So those 2 at the top of the division. Brad Riddell is fighting a dude who, by the looks of it, is like on a knockout streak. He's had like 4 or 5 knockouts in a row. So I've always had Brad Riddell as the best low-key city kickboxing dude. Don't know who he is. He's from Christchurch. Spent a lot of time in Thailand, as a lot of these city kickboxing dudes have. And there is still a chance we get the, I don't think we'll see Brad Riddell fight Dan Hooker, but they're in the same weight division. And Dan Hooker went down a weight division. He lost. Now he might come back up. And Brad Riddell is like one of the best up-and-coming fighters in that division. Blood Diamond and Carlos Ulberg, they're more in the David Naika stage of their development. So Ulberg had a loss, then a win in the UFC. Blood Diamond has had a loss in his debut earlier this year. So he'll hopefully come back with a win. Of course, all these dudes, like same with all the boxers, they've had shitloads of fights outside of these current organizations. So you mentioned David Naika and his amateur record. dude's in the Olympics, dude's in the Commonwealth Games, and he's like juggling that before he even gets into the top tier professional ranks. Like all these MMA fighters have had at least, 40 to 50 MMA fights. I think like someone like Blood Diamond's incredibly experienced. Israel Adesanya, I think he hit the 100 fight mark across all organizations. So and I feel like the same thing like for the boxers is like there's like the lower leagues, so to speak, reserve grade, under 20s, whatever parallel you want to draw there. And then they reach these professional competitions, these professional organizations. And I think that's kind of where we come in. And that like, so I'm the Carlos Ulberg record, he had a loss, then a win. That's just in the UFC. And talking about junior phase, like it's all about the professional ranks. But if we've got Adesanya and Kai Kara France, they're fighting for titles. Brad Riddell is on the rise, and then Ulberg and Diamond are at the start of their UFC careers. I think Adesanya and Kai Kara France are most similar to Joseph Parker, who was outside the CKB bubble, but Parker's competing for titles. And then I think Riddell is in that Junior Fa Hemi Ahio kind of bracket where they're on the rise, and Aotearoa Bias fully in tow here. I think they could all compete for titles, but they're just climbing up through their respective competitions. And then Blood Diamond and Carlos Ulberg are kind of in that David Naika stage where they're just gaining some experience, stacking up the wins to build a better overall record. Of course, in boxing, losses are kind of detrimental. In MMA and in the UFC, losses are all good. You just bounce back and you win your next fight and no one cares. So that's like kind of how I see a comparison. Adesanya and Kai Kara France, because there's no real boxing champion at City Kickboxing, but Joseph Parker is competing for titles. Brad Riddell, similar to Junior Fa and Hemi Ahio, they've been around for a long time, not a long time, but a decent time, and they are climbing up their competitions, their divisions. And then at the entry level, you got Blood Diamond and Carlos Ulberg. How do you feel about those comparisons based on what you know about the MMA stuff?
Yeah, sounds that's about right. I think because the MMA is a bit more of a I don't know. I think to get to the MMA, you're higher up than you are to just start a professional boxing career. Like that's sort of like once you crack the MMA type stuff, that's more like the step that Hemia here was probably trying to get to next, which is like, yeah, I've got this solid backup. Like I've got the Blood Diamond experience type stuff and the outside of that organization kind of thing. Now I want to step up into like the next thing where people know my name and I'm getting like, recognizable fights and stuff like that. And it's been just as tricky for those guys in particular, because the difference between them and Joseph Parker, David Nika, for example, is that those two have made decisions to base themselves overseas. In like recent time, that's been in England. I expect that'll continue because they've got the same trainer that they share, and Andy Lee.
You've mentioned Andy Lee a few times. Is he caught up in the like Kinahan? You know me, big mafia crime follower. Is he caught up in the Kinahan cartel stuff? Because I think he was loosely affiliated with I think it was like MGM or MGK Kinahan boxing, and basically Kinahan's an Irish dude his family are organized crime people out of Ireland, but then he tried to clean up his stuff through boxing and was associated with Tyson Fury, all these British boxers and international boxers as well. And I think Andy Lee was part of their gym or part of their system. So do you know anything if he's still trucking along and the Kiwi dudes, Joseph Parker and David Naika, are still going to work with him?
I haven't heard anything to the contrary. I mean, he might be like I'm sure he knows, sure he knows people. That doesn't necessarily mean he's like criminally involved or anything, or anything
Yeah, I don't
like
think
that.
he is trafficking cocaine. So let's
No,
be clear
certainly
about
not.
that.
But I will point out that someone who was trafficking cocaine was Tyson Fury's dad, who spent several years in prison, like in the 90s, I think. So there's there's certainly some. I wouldn't know. This is no secret to anyone that boxing has some shady underbellies to it. But Joseph Parker himself has been mentioned and some like sideways glance type stuff, court trial things. Sure people remember that. So, but I don't. I doubt that affects the boxing side of things or the gym or anything like that. I mean, half the time those like I'm skeptical as like what I should say, but like maybe it's just, gym's a nice way to launder money if it's so cool. It's probably absolutely nothing. Like we're probably just speculating and watching too much TV, right? But like it's just the place where you launder the money doesn't mean that's where the drama's going down. What was I saying before? Hemiya Hill and Junior Fa, because they've stayed affiliated with City Kickboxing based out of Auckland, I think has severely limited their options in terms of fights, just for what they could get over the last 2 years. Like they've been limited and also not limited, because I don't know if Junior Fa would have got the Joseph Parker fight had it not been the case that he was the next best heavyweight in the country and Joseph Parker was struggling to get fights overseas while borders were closed and things like that. So it's been a bit of a like hitting pause for those guys. And hopefully this is the ramp up afterwards, because it's Junior Fa in particular, just because it's been longer since he fought. I've felt quite stink for him, because he really did deserve some momentum off of the back of that Parker fight, and he got none. Like he got nothing of it. He just had to like sit back and watch Parker go on and have big fights and a couple pretty impressive wins on the back of having fought him. And it's like, well, where's my turn? And the stuff he tried to negotiate in Australia kept having holdups and troubles, and Australian boxing just doesn't always necessarily seem to be the happiest place to be if you're from a negotiation point of view, unless you can latch on to one of these title fights, because they do have a couple like in the lower weight divisions and like this. What was I saying? This what did I say? Lightweight unified title, I think was this one. Undisputed lightweight title. That's it's taken a while for this kind of fight to come around where he's had access to it. So hopefully this is the launching pad for him and for Hemiya Hill, and probably less so for David Nika, because I think he's probably already on a trajectory which this won't change. This is just a matter of here's an opportunity, stay busy, notch up another W on the record, and see how it goes.
So the fact that there are 3 City Kickboxing UFC title fights is pretty amazing. Of course, Alexander Volkanovski, we're putting in the associate bracket, which because David Naika has trained at City Kickboxing previously as well. So he is loosely affiliated. I think he hasn't been there for a while. I think it coincides with when there was like when he opted to move to the Joseph Parker side of things. He's basically like, I was watching something on Nat Geo or Discovery about like some program, and it was the manta ray, and the manta ray was swimming through the ocean, scooping up all the plankton, and then all these other little fish and baby sharks and everything come right up, and they're swimming. They're basically connected to the manta ray, and they're swimming along with it. All due respect to David Naika, he's found a couple manta rays there. Like he jumped on. He was part of City Kickboxing for a bit, and he was training there. And this isn't a bad thing. Like this is how you get better and improve. So it's a completely common sense approach. And then he jumped on the Joseph Parker manta ray, and that has also worked out quite well for him as well. But you can't go join the Joseph Parker manta ray when Joseph Parker's fighting Junior Fa and try and stay at City Kickboxing. Like that's just a niggly situation. But that goes to show like there are multiple combat sporting routes out of Aotearoa. Like you can go the City Kickboxing route, you can go a separate route as Joseph Parker has done, and there's other gyms, other boxing gyms, other MMA gyms popping up and going pretty well also. But my
Well,
point,
Nika spent a lot of time as an independent as well, didn't he? Like training himself, basically.
At Hamilton.
Yeah, like training in car parks and stuff like that. Also, I guess it's probably a point to make is that, yeah, he was the main sparrer for Joseph Parker in the Junior Fa fight. Junior Fa's main sparring partner was Hemi Ahiro. So there's like a quartet there, you know?
They should have a tour on too, like just...
They really should, like a tag team thing.
Well, there's all those fights in like Europe and shit where they're in like a rectangle ring and it's like 3-on-3 or like a tag team. Like they should definitely do that, like Aotearoa boxing. And no rugby league players allowed. Like we're not doing that shit. It's just like
pure. Not even Sonny Bill. He can commentate though. That's fine.
Well, he's in Australia. So 3 title fights associated with City Kickboxing. That is ridiculous. Let alone that Aotearoa has 6 UFC fighters and Gina Fabian competing in the PFL. We've got Joseph Parker, Junior Fa, and Hemi Ahio, David Naika, all among the best or on the rise of the boxing scene. So when we say Aotearoa is the best sporting nation in the world, this is why. Because we are one of the smallest, we are a small nation, and yet we compete at the top level of pretty much every sport, whether individual or team sport. And this is on display heavy duty with some of this combat sports stuff, especially when it comes in these waves that we experience where it's all in together and it really hits home. Like earlier in the week in that Patreon podcast, it hit home how amazing Kane Williamson is. He's scoring shitloads of runs and he captained the Black Caps to the T20 World Cup final, the ODI World Cup final, and World Test Championship success. Crazy. This is a similar moment where I'm looking at the list of fights, especially out of city kickboxing, but also Aotearoa combat sports, and it's like, holy shit. You know, we've got a smidgen of the population of America, United Kingdom, Brazil for a lot of the MMA, UFC stuff as well, let alone any other country. But we do as good as those nations at the highest level. So big it up to combat sports from Aotearoa. And I'll just throw one idea here, Wildcard. I've been always trying to find a bit of gratitude, find a bit of perspective with some of the sporting stuff. Footy. We have the best footy experience in the world. So what's the best rugby league competition? It's the NRL. What's the best rugby union competition? Super Rugby. And of course, there's no like world-class football per se, but we have enough football to where Kiwis can get their fix, and it's part of the footy equation. So I'm using rugby league, rugby union, and football combined in a holy trinity of footy, and we are incredibly lucky. Like, obviously, it's a bit harder to pull football into this, but just straight up and down, the NRL is the best rugby league competition in the world. Super Rugby is the best rugby union competition in the world. We are spoiled for footy. And then, of course, we've got enough football to get a bit of a fix as well. Like, it's pretty amazing. And it's a reason to be grateful for our sporting platter.
And the football itself is on the rise too. And if we qualify, like if you always qualify for the World Cup, then that's a major boost. The football ferns are co-hosting the next World Cup in a year's time. I was just reading a good article with an interview with Abby Erceg on The Athletic earlier in the week, where she was talking about like her hopes that New Zealand football are going to be able to capitalize on the major event that is, and also her fears that they maybe won't, which is something I've been wondering quite a bit about myself. So it's interesting to hear the team captain say that, because I really don't think that the country quite acknowledges yet the significance of that. Like that's the Women's World Cup is not some offshoot kind of tournament. That's millions and millions and millions and millions of viewers and interest from all over the world, and like, you know, all corners and everything. Like that's the big time. and hopefully that'll ramp up as it gets closer, because as we know, when there's a big sporting event on in most Kiwi cities, a large portion of the crowd like to roll up 5 minutes before kickoff and line up for tickets then, and rather than being necessarily that far planned ahead. So I'm hoping that as you get closer, the momentum will continue to roll. But that just all plays into the same thing. And it is a huge month coming up for the All Whites as well, with the Costa Rica playoff and everything about that. And these squads just been named. You got all these players like closing out their seasons, which means that easy to put into perspective what guys like Kakache and Joe Bell and Chris Wood and guys like that have achieved, or, on the women's side, Liv Chance and Abby Ursig just getting into her season. But Rhea Percival, even though she's injured, what she did with Spurs this season, like, it's easy to put that into perspective. At the end of the season, it also means it's a transfer window coming up, which means another dose of that, and just seeing all like the professional ranks grow and expand as they do every single time a European transfer window opens. So that one is a little bit more of a you sort of got to wiggle it around to make it fit on the same level as the rugby league, rugby union stuff, but definitely heading in that direction. It doesn't take too much when you stop and smell the roses there to see as much as that,
Pretty epic June, July coming up, like especially Black Caps Tour of England.
We've got that too.
All this other shit happening, so it's a beautiful time to be alive. I don't, because part of me want to say is like none of that compares to the Niche Cage NRL Derby, because that's not true, and it's just simply not true, because the Niche Cage Derby is between two mediocre rugby league teams, and I was thinking about this wildcard. It is I think in a weird way, in a cursed way, just an awkward, kind of disgusting way. It really summarizes the Niche Cage, because I'm kind of a Warriors fan. I also love Aotearoa Rugby League. I also love the Storm. And I was thinking about my most watchable Kiwi NRL teams. We've got the Storm, really loving the Eels right now. The Roosters are always top of that. So I love all rugby league, but some of my, I love watching the Eels right now, for example. So I'm kind of like a quasi Warriors fan. I pretend to be a Warriors fan. I am a Warriors fan, but I'm also a fan of other matters in the Kiwi NRL matter. So that's my side of the Niche Cage Derby. And you're supporting a dirty merger club that has no Kiwi NRL talent. Literally nothing. In recent years, there has been Pawasa Fa'amasili, but he is stuck in reserve grade, and 25 players named by the Dragons for this game, this epic, what did I call it? Top of the bottom 8 battle for the Niche Cage Derby between two mediocre NRL teams, 25 players named for the Dragons. Not one of them is from Aotearoa, which sets up the Dragons and sets up your fandom. Your fandom is of a team who have the least Kiwi NRL presence in the NRL. So congratulations to you. Congratulations to me for my fandom of the Warriors, apparently. And here we are for the Niche Cage Derby, one of the most mediocre derbies in the world, I'd say.
Yeah. I don't know that anyone else considers it a derby except for us as well. We might be alone there, but that's what makes it special. There was a time where the Dragons had a nice Kiwi presence. Once upon a time, Jason Nightingale and Jeremy Smith and Nathan Feen
for a while.
Benji Marshall was there for a wee while. I'm sure there was someone else in the title winning team, but maybe not. But there's been a few sprinkled out throughout the thing. One guy I always think of when I Tane Milne, who was in and out of so many teams, and the Dragons was one of those. The Warriors was one of those, and I still keep seeing him popping up. Am I right in saying he's having quite a decent season this year, or is that?
He's doing a job.
That's all right. Doing a job,
which is all right. The Dragons had Patrick Herbert for a while, back-to-back junior Kiwi seasons, which was quite impressive before he came to the Warriors. And right now they have Navajo Doyle, dummy half, for their SG ball team, I think it was earlier this year. So Shout out to him. And yeah, just two mediocre footy teams going at it here. Top of the bottom 8, interesting contest Saturday afternoon. Dragons won the first game of the season, decent win. And the thing that, like, putting my, Warriors fan perspective here, the thing that always, I guess, scares me about the Dragons is the Dragons are just rugged. So, like, it's not, no matter what kind of footy they're playing, they're always going to show up. They're always going to be aggressive. They're always going to have energy. And yeah, sure, they might not score heaps of points. They might not have the best defense, and they might be a mediocre team. But when you're coming up against the Warriors, as long as you're grizzly and rugged, you're in the contest. And that's, I think, back to the first game, I think that was a key factor in their win in that first game. And that's just the Dragons. I don't know what else there is to the Dragons team. You might tell me some subtleties in their attack and their variations and all sorts of little tactics they do, but just straight up and down, they're just a grizzly, rugged fucking footy team. And I think that matches well against the Warriors. But we'll get to the Warriors in a second. How are you just feeling about the Dragons? It is the Niche Cage Derby, but we're trying to like extend out the Kiwi NRL bracket here. And I do want to make an announcement. Like, this needs to be said because for whatever reason, people cling to the Warriors. Like, I don't know why. The Aotearoa Warriors do not represent Aotearoa in the NRL. All the Kiwi people do. Like, it's the players, it's the people. The Aotearoa Warriors are just a team that are based in Aotearoa. And of course, they can whip up a marketing thing. They can build a culture and be like, yeah, we are the Aotearoa team. But a lot of the reaction to the Warriors stuff is like, it's kind of impressive actually, because it shows you how many people in New Zealand or linked to New Zealand support the Warriors. But holy shit, you got to open up your mind. You got to open up to all the like amazing people from Aotearoa who exist in the NRL. There's just so much talent, and the Kiwi NRL takeover is real, and Kiwi NRL matters are so fun and entertaining and enjoyable to learn about and to track, and there's always new youngsters. None of that is evident in the Dragons wildcard.
No, it does buzz me just seeing like because the Warriors have a big stranglehold on the Kiwi sporting sort of culture. I don't know what it is. But it just feels like so many people hate watch them. Like, a lot of people are watching these games so that they can pipe up when they lose and say, "Look at this team disappointing me once again." And it's like, well, do you pipe up when they're winning? Like, because they've won, a fair few this season. It's not like they've lost every single game. They're alternating between some extremes. There's gritty, tight, battling wins, and there's big thrashings or losing to teams with 11 men or whatever. But like, that's kind of normal in the NRL. Like, it's just one of those. I feel like it's one of those single market things where there's one team, and because I was thinking about this. I can't even remember what it was. It was the NBA. I was watching some NBA playoffs and seeing like Celtics fans complaining about referees, and then Miami fans complaining about referees, and Golden State Warriors fans complaining about referees, and Memphis Grizzlies fans complaining about referees, and Dallas Mavericks fans and Phoenix. Like, every single team's fan base thinks that the league and the referees hate them. Like, this is normal sporting areas. Like, everyone's fan base, like every fan base out there thinks they're the ones that are being picked on. And so when that happens in like Sydney, the Dragons fan is saying that or something like that, no one cares because the Panthers are saying it, the Rabbitohs are saying it, the Roosters are saying it, like everyone's saying it, and you can see the context of like, oh, that's just a fan being a fan. When it happens with the Warriors, you only get one perspective, because they're the only team in the country. They're the only team from that league that's represented in this, like, the Aotearoa market. Like, people start to believe it in a way where, like, I mean, we're talking about like beliefs and stuff. We're on board here as saying there's a curse on this club. So take a grain of salt perhaps with what I'm saying here. But like, there's just, I don't know, I get frustrated with the negativity that floats around the Warriors sometimes, where it's just like, but if you look at the wider league, and which is exactly what you do when you stop looking at them like they're the sole representative of this country, as opposed to looking at like every team except the Dragons is stocked with Kiwi players. When you start looking at it from that perspective, that from your announcement there, like you have that wider lens to realize, oh yeah, that's just like sports. That's what being a sports fan is. You get pissed off at decisions and you look for someone to blame and whatever. But it just feels like that's been so internalized in the way that the Warriors are talked about. And I'm not even talking about the Warriors being cursed here, but maybe this is an extension of that. I don't know, but just the way they're covered and the way that people talk about them just in like random society, it's so weird to me. Like it's just, it lacks that context of being a well-rounded rugby league. Like this is why I say this. I think there's just a lot of people, because like your articles get good traction from writing the opposite perspective of that, and we always get heaps of comments of people being like, "Thank you for like saying that," in a like from the actual like the in deep fans. It just feels like, and I struggle to not bring this back around to a league versus union thing, where it feels like maybe the union, the rugby union mafia are a little bit looking for something to pick and choose, like some bones to pick at, you know what I mean? But maybe I'm getting a little conspiratorial about that. I just wish people would chill out about the Warriors, you know?
We've talked about that a lot before. Like we're not really, like that's just regurgitating, but I'll take what you said. Like that was a good delivery. Well done. Like nice medium pacer hitting the top of off stump. But I'm bringing out a reverse sweep here because, and I'm hitting it for 4. Like let's be clear, I'm a boundary hitter. There was a Dizzy Rascal did a remix of Lean Back in the day. And one of his lines, I vividly remember this, was like something, certified 6 hitter. And I was like, bruh, it's like pure hip hop, sporting crossover. Like that is me. Like I do love a bit of Dizzy Rascal, old school Dizzy Rascal, boy in the corner and all that shit. And he is combining that with cricket, certified 6 hitter. Like,
wouldn't play in America, but
yeah, well, who cares?
That's the uniqueness.
But the thing about the Warriors is, well, first, no, it's all those, like you went quite big picture with some of your ideas there, and I want to keep it focused. But the thing about the Warriors, so I write about Kiwi NRL, and I do kind of, like in my Warriors diary, I didn't make sure to include the highlight video of Paul Turner and also the yarn about Hayes Perham in the Warriors diary, because the Warriors fans, well, not even Warriors fans, just like Kiwi Rugby League fans, I think, are quite close-minded in the sense that those players, if they're not playing for the Warriors, fuck them. And it's kind of like, oh, but why'd the Warriors let them go? How could, like, everyone gets better? Like,
yeah,
I'm happy for Hayes Perham. I like watching Hayes Perham play on the wing for one of the best NRL teams. I'm happy for Isaiah Papali'i. I'm so happy watching the Eels and some of these dudes play at the best of their abilities. The Warriors don't even come into the equation. Like, maybe that is the crux and the nugget and the mindfulness here is like, just celebrate the Kiwi person. Like, who cares what team they're playing for? Yeah, sure. If you're from Northland, you should be fucking supporting the Penrith Panthers because they got James Fisher-Harris and they also got Preston Ricky from the Hokianga region as well. Like, that's your team. There you go. Support the Kiwi dude. And I think there's a long history of many rugby league fans from Aotearoa supporting the Bulldogs, supporting the Seagulls because there was Matthew Ridge or some other Kiwi dude. And I think that's the energy we want to get into, where I just want to see Kiwi dudes thriving. And Hayes Perham is not a winger. That's why Joseph Suwali jumped over him and scored an amazing try. Hayes Perham's not a winger, but Hayes Perham is such a baller that he can go from fullback to centre to halves to winger in one of the most rugged NRL teams. Like, if you're playing for the Parramatta Eels, you got to do so much tough mahi, and you got to like show up with an attitude and an intensity every game. And there's Hayes Perham playing on the wing. And sure, he might get dragged back every second carry. He's not averaging 10 meters per run, but he's doing a job. and he's in the NRL every single week. Maybe it's Matthew Tomoko, starting center for the Raiders every single week. Look at the Tigers. You got Stafford Toa, Asu Kepaoa, even Junior Tupou, who made his debut last week, but I'm still kind of grappling with some of his Kiwi NRL stuff. I haven't quite processed it yet because he was born and raised in Auckland, but he wanted to play Wallabies rugby union before being signed with the Tigers. So just got to figure that one out. There is a video of him like running a 100-meter sprint on YouTube back in the day when he was at like an intermediate school in Auckland, if you want to check that out. But we're going deep into the mangroves here. My advice is just support the Kiwi dude. Take the Warriors out of the equation and just support the Kiwis. Because these dudes are going from Aotearoa to Australia and they are performing better than Australians. And this is all just good for Aotearoa Rugby League. And if you'll entertain me here, Wildcard, the NRL are only considering expansion to New Zealand because numbers back it up. They're only considering expansion to New Zealand because there are analytics that back it up. They're seeing TV viewerships. They're seeing social media engagement. They're seeing merchandise sales, all of that stuff. That is what they'll base their decision on. So they're like just putting it out there, like in a couple of years, we might expand to New Zealand. But they're only planting that seed because they see the analytics that back this up. So however you want to feel about rugby union and rugby league, like best footy nation in the world, all good, both exist together, but it's not whether Aotearoa deserves it or if it's going to be a good idea. I'm telling you, the NRL is only considering it because they have information to back up that it's going to be a good move. You know, like that, it's a business move. And they have analytics to reinforce it being a good business move. For whatever reason, maybe because the Kiwi NRL takeover is here. It's already existing in Australia. And if you're like rugby league, oh, fuck, who cares? Let's get back into the niche cage derby. Warriors versus Dragons, Warriors footy wildcard. Fuck the Warriors. They're mediocre, but we like talking about them, especially when they're playing the Dragons. I told you before the show, wildcard, that only one dude, one fullback, has more errors than Matt Duffy. And it's Reece Walsh. Reece Walsh is third in errors for the NRL, which I just found interesting. And there was one other stat that the Warriors are last for post-contact meters in the NRL. So if you think about the big old Warriors forward pack and those stereotypes, they definitely don't exist. I like the work of Freddie Lussick out of dummy half. I think he's a proper dummy half. Jazz Tavang is not a proper dummy half. So I think that's a good addition to the Warriors team. And there's also this other thing happening where Tohu Harris is always named on an edge and always plays in the middle. So just keep an eye on that one. For your Dragons defense there, wildcard, watch out for Tohu Harris steaming up the guts. Bit of ball playing, bit of footwork. And the way I frame this game for the Warriors is this is one of the games they need to win if they do want to be a top of the bottom 8 team. Because if you lose a game like this, then you're moving into the doldrums of the NRL. And ask Steve Hansen, ask old Shag Hansen about the doldrums of the NRL, because it looks like a fun place from where the Warriors are sitting right now, top of the bottom 8, celebrations. What scares you? This is a good question, I think. What scares you about the Warriors?
What scares me is nothing overtly, like nothing over the top where I'm like, you know, you come up against the Melbourne Storm, as both these two teams have done within the last month. It's like everything scares you. Playing against each other, I don't think either will be particularly like terrified of anything. But like the areas where I think the Warriors could get an advantage, I mean, the Dragons, I'm not sure if they're necessarily, like, I don't know if the stats would necessarily back this up as them being an error-prone team, but it feels like they're the type of team who like I don't know if you watched them lose to the Titans in Golden Point, but there were like two just like ridiculous errors that they made in there. Like they seem like the type of team that they don't necessarily make a heap of them, although maybe they do. I haven't looked at the stats or anything, but they feel like the kind of team that will make crucial errors, and they can be their own worst enemy in that way because they don't necessarily have the skill and game breaking talent to make up for that. And the Warriors are an error prone team. They like that seems fairly obvious. But they also have like a guy like Reece Walsh can make an error, or he can make a line break run 80 meters and score an amazing try. Sean Johnson might kick the ball on the full, or he might put it perfectly in the corner like a banana grub or swing back around, and there's a try assist to whoever running through on the wing or whatever. Like Ben Hunt can do that for the Dragons, but he's maybe the only one. Like he might be the only reliable source of like proper attack that they have. I see Moses Mbai has been named to play dummy half. Nothing special happening there, and it's not really his position. The Dragons do have a good forward pack at the moment. Like Molo's doing well and whatever, and Jack Bird in the back row is a little bit like Jack Bird's a weird player, but he is a nice overskilled back rower, not to the level of Tohu Harris, which is a worry. But I do think the Dragons can muscle up in that way. But I think if the Warriors have one of their days also, it's one of them like the Dragons might not be able to keep up because they're not really a team that can play outside of the arm wrestle too well. You know what I mean?
Warriors are 8th for total errors. Dragons are 9th. So niche case
really
derby,
similar then.
Beautiful levels of mediocrity there. But of course, as always, I don't know if this has been the case for the Dragons wildcard because the Dragons have had some tough days recently in recent years, especially for the Warriors, though. There's always worse teams and there's always more drama. And yeah, the Dragons have had a bit of drama in the last few years. So fuck the Dragons. You mentioned the Moses Mbai situation coming into dummy half, and I think it was like the Hello Sport betting podcast about even, and one of the dudes, I think it was the Michael guy, he was talking about how NRL footy is just based around running. Obviously, it's footy, so it's what you need to run. But like the spine players running and how often they run and what happens when they run. And you asked me based on the variety shows from that Rabbitohs game, what was the difference between the first half and the second half. A lot of the Warriors highlights came from dummy half running. And I think Dejan Arce is quite a busy runner. Reece Walsh is a very active runner. Jazz Tavanga is not going to run. But Freddie Lussick is a crafty dummy half who had a couple runs and a kick in his Warriors debut. And you, like Ben Hunt, he can run, but he's also their leading playmaker, their leading figure as far as getting them where they need to go, kicking long, shoveling the ball along. And that kind of takes your running game off the pedestal. In a similar way, Sean Johnson isn't very active running the footy, but we kind of knew that. We knew Sean Johnson wasn't going to be razzle-dazzle. Sean Johnson is doing a mediocre job of Chad Townsend and Adam Reynolds, as I also said on the variety show. And the Warriors are also last in post-contact meters. So if they're last in post-contact meters and they have Adam Whenua-Blake, who is always one of the best post-contact meter eating forwards, I think that just plays into this key idea that you need blokes running directly, because you can only go sideways if you're also getting your first receiver to run, getting runs out of dummy half, so that the defenses, they have to engage that initial job of tackling the runner before they can move on to their next job, which is sliding across, getting across the field. And I think the Warriors kind of have an advantage there. Like
yeah,
Cody,
definitely.
I don't think Cody Ramsey is going to be much of a kind of fullbacky running threat. I think Reece Walsh is more important. especially if Reece Walsh is, I think he had like 3 dummy half runs for 50 meters against the Rabbitohs, which is exceptional. And that's a tough benchmark to get, where you're averaging like 15, almost 15 meters per run, which is ridiculous. Like, that's not going to happen. But if he's got 3 dummy half runs every game, given how fast he is, given how elusive he is, that's quite exciting. But for the Dragons, I don't think Moses Imbai is going to be too active out of dummy half. He's just going to pass the ball. Ben Hunt has so much on his plate that I don't think he's going to be very busy running. Talatala Mone is quite dynamic with his footwork, so that's a running threat. Good for him. Cody Ramsey is still trying to figure out the fullback subtleties. Same with Reece Walsh. It's like, when do you get involved? Same with someone like Roger Tuivasa-Sheck in rugby union. You can kind of see him, like, start of his Super Rugby stuff, he was figuring out, do I hit this ruck? Do I stand here and look lost? Do I set up for my next play? Like, those are some of the subtleties of how to get involved, which I think apply to Cody Ramsey and Reece Walsh. Because a lot of fullbacks in the NRL, especially the shit ones, they can just float behind the ball the whole time. And it's like, yeah, you're there, you're hovering around the ball, but you're not getting the ball. Whereas you look at James Tedesco and Tom Trebojevic and those type of dudes, they will get the ball one pass off the ruck and just run straight. And hopefully their speed or footwork can find a gap. And that's good. Reece Walsh shouldn't be at first receiver because he's just running into big dudes. But if he gets in out of dummy half, it's a similar effect. And I think that's a key point for these fullbacks, especially these 2 fullbacks. Cody Ramsey is a bit of a winger, and Reece Walsh is a learning fullback. He's still developing his game. How they get involved with their running is going to be really important, especially sprinkled in with their other spine players. Cody Ramsey needs to run because Imbai and Hunt probably aren't going to run. I have really enjoyed Dejan Arce and how active he is running the footy. Like, he's the type of dude, you might put shape outside him, but he's going to get the ball and he's just going to run. And that's all good, because you're kind of laying those foundations for what your next few plays might be, while also posing a threat in that moment.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I did check on the whatever the app is called that I use for these things. The Cody Ramsey's, this has only played 3 games, and it doesn't say what the positional breakdown is, though. I'm pretty sure he would have only played wing this season, because they started off with what's his name, young fella at fullback, Sloan or Sullivan, I forget which one, but then they swapped to Moses Imbai at fullback for the last sort of month or so, and like, Moses Imbai is a solid player. He's easily the best defensive option they had at fullback, which I imagine is what that was down to, but he doesn't offer you much. He's not particularly fast. He doesn't, he'll a solid, decent 6 out of 10 type player, but you don't really want that in a fullback in the NRL. You kind of want something a bit more. So Ramsey comes in, who's mostly played as a winger, has played fullback before NRLs. It's, but like you say, he's figuring out that role. He's not. It's not that he's not a natural. He's like, he is a wing / fullback. It's just that he's played a lot more wing in NRL level than he has fullback.
Quickly, all 3 of his games this season were on the wing. First 3 games of the season: Warriors, Panthers, Sharks. All 3 were on the wing. Yeah,
I guessed as much. And Moses Imbai, you might have to check him as well, because I know he's played the last month in fullback. Can't remember if he played starting half. He did play off the bench as like the utility type guy, and now he's starting dummy half because obviously no McCulloch this week. But then McCulloch, when he plays, he's not a runner out of dummy half either. He's there because he's a great passer and an extra kicking option and an experienced head. And most of all, because he was coached previously by Anthony Griffin, which quite a few players in this, like recent recruits from the Dragons, have fallen under that category. Bit of a Doc Rivers thing going on there. That's just to make the point that at no point in this season, even though the Dragons seem to be changing their spine with regularity, with the one exception being Ben Hunt, who's by far and away their best player at the moment. He's the one guy in that, because Amoni's been in and out as well. He's same deal there, like got dropped and then got recalled, and like the spine has been constantly changing, but at no point have they been a team that strikes you as like a good dummy half running team. They are quite a good like guys running into gaps, semi-mobile forwards and good passes in and around the ruck, like McCulloch, like Hunt. But that's not the same thing as what we're talking about in terms of like dummy half running. I'd be surprised the Dragons are particularly up there. That just doesn't seem to be their kind of thing. And they haven't been a team that likes to pick a number. I mean, Josh Maguire has done minutes filling in at dummy half during the season. Like that tells you all you need to know. They're not a team that's prioritizing like picking up the old the scoot and boot type stuff. Like just scoop up the ball and dash through. Like that's just not been happening for this team. That's not a thing they've been trying to do. So yeah, that could potentially be, especially whenever you get a matchup where it's like this team likes to do one thing and this team likes to do the opposite thing. It becomes like, well, which one of those two, like these two opposing forces, which one's going to win out? Because that might end up being like quite a defining factor, especially because the Warriors second half against the Bunnies, as you point out, quite a lot of success in terms of getting out of dummy half and getting those early meters up the middle sort of thing.
I'd like to say that I'm enjoying the Warriors forward pack, but I don't know if that can be said when they're not really performing. Fanua Blake's still doing well, and Tohu Harris adds some starch to the forward pack. Matt Lodge is typically psycho. How it, like, the thing I'm thinking about is how I've watched the Warriors in recent weeks, and from the start of the game, fair play, they have played some good opponents, but from the start of these games, they're like being overlapped on the edges. It's like,
yeah,
nothing new. Like, we're well acquainted with the Warriors not being able to stop teams and not being very good at defense. Like, that is part of the Warriors' curse. But I am curious how that looks against the Dragons, because I don't think the Dragons are throwing the same shapes and the same energy that Cronulla Sharks might do. Because even like that, some of that Shark stuff, like the Sharks were getting overlaps with less players on the field.
Yeah.
Which is bloody impressive. Like, shout out to that. Like, that is some footy magic right there. I don't know if like football equivalent is like, yeah, you're down to 10 men and you're still getting your right back. He's overlapping down the sideline. Like, that shouldn't be happening. You got one less player on the field. Like, it's quite easy to figure that out. And rugby league edge defense is like it's a fucking like Da Vinci Code type of mystery. Whereas like we've just watched the best teams be pretty good at edge defense for a long time. And then you come back to the Warriors or other mediocre teams and you're like, you're just not doing it. You're not doing it. And those signs have been evident for the Warriors this season. But I don't think the Dragons are, what do they say in the rugby league fraternity, stripping the Warriors of numbers down those edges. I don't think the Dragons are doing that, just they don't have the same level of cohesion and creativity in their plays. So I think that's going to play into the Warriors' hands as well.
Yeah, Dragons definitely not an expansive type of team. They just don't have the players to be that at the moment. Like, they just don't. They've got very inexperienced guys in important positions, and the coach has continually tried to drop them, which I don't think helps anything. I think you pick a thing and commit to it, like especially with the young players. But he's not been obviously very comfortable with that, and so he's swapped them out. But he's swapped them out for like gritty veterans who also don't provide spark. And so I'd much rather see like Sloan and Sullivan and Amoni getting good minutes, and someone like Cody Ramsey as well. Rather see them playing and actually have a team that can like do some stuff, even if it comes at a bit more of a defensive cost. Because what are you going to win the premiership this year? I don't think so. Probably not making the top 8. So what are you actually building towards, playing 34-year-olds? I don't know. But the Warriors' edge defense is a really weird one because, and I think it's very relevant because the first game of the season, my defining memory of that was a relatively close game for about 60 out of 80 minutes. But the first, it was probably more like the 50 to 70 minute mark. Michele Ravalawa just went nuts on Marcelo Montoya and scored a hat trick and just made him look like a chump. And Montoya is actually back in, I don't know if he's playing this week, but he was back in the team last week. So nice and timely for Michele. I'm sure you'd enjoy that one. But it also seems like a trend that we've seen for, I mean, obviously when you play the Storm, they're going to do this because the Storm shift the ball quickly and they have speed on the wings and they just like, this is what they do to everybody. So if you're a team that doesn't seem to know how to slide as a unit, but that's just a weird thing about the Warriors at the moment is you see them conceding tries where it's like the center's going one way and the wing is going the opposite way. It's like, what's going on here? Someone shoots out of the line just way too early and leaves an overlap, and just weird little mistakes that feel more like coaching errors than player errors. But also you do have to consider that the Warriors back five is super inexperienced as well. And it's been a theme of the whole season. And they have stuck with a lot of those guys and have let them ride through it. And you're going to have to cop some mistakes and judgment and stuff like that in there. Does feel like maybe the systems aren't as cohesive as they could be, but also, yeah, I think that might be another factor to look out for because of the success that Ravalawa had last time scoring a hat trick against this team on the wing. Well, this is a team that seems to concede a lot of tries on the wing, and it hasn't really changed. It hasn't really improved since then.
I don't remember any of this, but if I kind of have visions of what happened, it was just Ravalawa running over Montoya, though. So at least Montoya was there in front of him. And that actually reminds me a lot of the Warriors attacking plays and mediocre teams attacking plays where you run this extravagant backline shift and your winger gets the ball one-on-one. And it's like, what was the point of everything before that?
Could have just thrown it straight to him.
Especially if they go from like one sideline to the other sideline, it's like, okay, dummy half passes, and the pass has to be a big 15-meter pass because that's what we want to do. We want to get to here, then we're going to go show under, then we're going to go out the back, and then we're going to throw a cutout ball to a one-on-one situation. So what the fuck was all that for? Like you could literally gridiron pass it over to him and be in the same position. So at least I think if they get a body in front of the winger, that's a good thing. The issue is the whole point of those attacking plays is to get you an overlap, to get you 2 meters outside that winger. And if that's the case, then you're fucked. But if I do remember correctly, a lot of Ravalawa's stuff was just running over Montoya. And
I think that is true, yeah.
And that's okay.
And good finishes in the corner sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, that's just like Montoya's not going to do that again, I don't think. I quite like Marcelo Montoya and Fijian Chilean as well. So a bit of a Fijian on Fijian crime against Ravalawa.
Didn't think of that.
But I think, you just get your body in front and hope for the best. So now I've just got all these like visions of just mediocre rugby league, like shift it to get one-on-one. Okay. It's like NBA. It's like all these like, we're going to run this play. Steven Adams is going to get here. Then he's going to put a screen in here. Then we're going to do this. And then we're going to do that. And now it's one-on-one. It's like, fuck, what did you just waste all that time for? Like, might as well just try and something else. I don't know. Whereas you watch the Storm and these best teams, their shape and their shifts are getting them into space, which is what you want to do in every sport. Find the space, get into the space, blast off into space. And that's the podcast. Niche Case Derby, Dragons vs Warriors, that's a Saturday afternoon. As always, big up Aotearoa, big up all the individual Kiwis and the collections of Kiwis who represent Aotearoa around the world in the NRL, in Australian competitions. Like people don't like look at the, this former Phoenix player or this former, people aren't having the discussion about Shea Ili or other NBL players like, the fuck are the Phoenix or Breakers doing? Like leaving there to go. Like
Shea Ili's not the best example there because there's a really obvious thing about how like his departure lined up was because they brought in RJ Hampton. It was like that cultural shift was,
but there wasn't
once
the
you let
reaction.
Shea Illy go, you let a dude like that go, point of no return. So
like you can see it because you're like, yeah, it's following Shea Illy, but there wasn't, no one looks at Shea Illy now and be like, the fuck are the Breakers doing? No, it's just all about Shea Illy. And if you leave the Phoenix to go join an A-League club, like people aren't looking at like, why did the Phoenix let him go? No, it's just like that dude made a
bigger
move.
and better things.
Yeah, and he's having fun. So hopefully you can have fun on the Aotearoa Sporting Weekend and around Aotearoa. Big it up. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Cheer.